Hey guys, tonight we sink into the gloriously unglamorous underbelly of 17th-century Paris. Picture this. You're not strolling wide boulevards lit by gas lamps. No, you're squeezing down a shadowed alley barely wider than your shoulders, your boots squelching into something suspiciously soft. The air hangs thick, a potent cocktail of wood smoke, rotting vegetables, unwashed humanity, and the sharp tang of ammonia from countless chamber pots hastily emptied from upper windows. Forget romantic notions. This city thrums with chaos. Carts rattle over uneven stones. Hawkers bellow over mangy dogs fighting over offal, and everywhere is the suffocating press of bodies. 500,000 souls crammed into a medieval maze designed for a tenth that number. You're breathing air thick with the dust of crumbling plaster, the soot from countless hearths, and the microscopic promise of diseases nobody even understands yet. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive a week here without a serious immune system upgrade and a strong stomach. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment too. Where are you listening from right now, and what's the local time? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your feet instinctively seek the slightly higher, marginally drier path along the very edges of the cobbles, avoiding the central channel running with, well, let's just call it the street soup. This isn't just mud. It's the collective runoff of a city drowning in its own waste. Think discarded fish heads mingling with horse manure, mixed with ash, mixed with spoiled grain, mixed with the inevitable results of a populace without proper sewage. The concept of municipal garbage collection is laughable. Households toss refuse directly into the street or designated piles that become miniature festering landmarks. Raking it into the central gutter for rain to hopefully wash away is considered a civic duty performed with varying enthusiasm. Imagine the smell on a hot August afternoon. Actually, don't. It's why the wealthy douse themselves in perfume and powder their elaborate wigs. It's not just fashion, it's olfactory warfare. Here's a mainstream historical fact for you. Paris in the 1600s was arguably the largest, most densely populated city in Western Europe, bursting at its ancient seams. Its medieval walls still stood constraining explosive growth into a teeming, unsustainable pressure cooker. Authorities issued decrees constantly trying to manage the filth, ordering citizens to sweep in front of their homes, forbidding the dumping of certain wastes at night, implying it was perfectly fine by day, threatening fines that were rarely enforced. It was a losing battle fought with broomsticks against a tsunami of grime. Now, a quirky tidbit, some enterprising or desperate souls didn't just dump their chamber pots into the street. Oh no. Certain corners became notorious for midnight marauders who'd collect the valuable liquid component under cover of darkness. Why tanneries needed ammonia for processing leather and urine was a prime source. Talk about niche recycling. You might hear the slosh of buckets and see shadowy figures flitting between doorways long after respectable folk were abed. Just another layer to the city's pungent economy. And here's where historians still argue, was Paris uniquely filthy compared to other major European capitals of the era? Or was it just better documented? London had its infamous Great Stink later, but Parisian chroniclers of the 1600s seemed particularly obsessed with detailing the muck, the smells, the overflowing cemeteries, and the public health disasters. Some scholars suggest Parisian geography, built on relatively flat land with a slow-moving Seine-made waste removal, inherently harder than in hillier cities. Others argue it was simply a matter of scale and failed governance, a perfect storm of population density and administrative incompetence. The debate, much like the streets themselves, remains murky. So you stand there breathing shallowly through your mouth, trying not to gag, feeling the grit settle on your skin. The sheer volume of waste is overwhelming. It's not just an inconvenience, it's a visible, tactile, olfactory manifestation of urban crisis. Disease is rampant. Typhoid, dysentery, the plague always lurking just a port away. The connection between filth and illness is vaguely understood, but solutions are medieval in a rapidly modernizing world. They try sweeping, they try flushing gutters, they try threatening fines. Nothing makes a dent. The piles grow higher, the stench grows thicker, the rats grow bolder. Desperation hangs as heavy as the smell of overripe cheese left in the sun. It's a city on the brink, a city desperately in need of a miracle or at least a very unconventional, very hungry solution. Little do you know, shuffling around the next corner, snuffling in the gutter with surprising efficiency, is the beginning of an answer. An answer with a snout, a curly tail, and an appetite that could clear a market square in minutes. We're about to witness the city's great grunting gamble dot. That suffocating layer of grime coating every surface isn't just background noise. It's the defining character of your daily existence. You quickly learn the rhythm dictated by the city's garbage cycle. Dawn barely cracks the skyline before the scrape of wooden shovels begins. The chiffoniers, rag pickers so essential yet utterly despised, are already at work. Their hunched figures move through the gray light poking through the fresh deposits of the night. Seeking anything salvageable, bits of cloth, metal fragments, discarded bones, scraps of paper. It's a desperate economy built on other people's discards, their hands, blackened faces obscured by scarves against the miasma. They work with a weary efficiency, filling their wicker baskets before vanishing back into the warren of alleys. Their finds fuel a shadowy secondary market. Rags pulped for paper, bones boiled down for glue, metal melted and recast. You sidestep one. His eyes vacant above the grimy cloth, a human symptom of the city's systemic filth. But the rag pickers are just the first wave. By mid-morning, the sheer volume of waste accumulating daily becomes crushingly apparent. Imagine mountains, not picturesque hills, but festering, buzzing, steaming mounds, rising at designated spots near markets, outside taverns, against the walls of churches. These aren't occasional piles. They are permanent, evolving landscapes. Kitchen slobs, broken pottery, fish guts, ashes, spoiled grain, butcher's offal, discarded straw, human and animal waste. It all converges. Flies form dense, shifting clouds above them. Rats, bold as brass, scamper over the peaks, their squeaks a constant counterpoint to the city's din. You see stray dogs' ribs visible beneath mangy fur, tearing at something unidentifiable within the heap. The stench isn't a single note. It's a complex, ever-changing symphony of rot, fermentation, and decay that clings to your clothes and hair, a smell you stop consciously noticing only because you'd go mad if you did. Trying to walk past one of these midden mountains requires careful navigation, holding your breath, choosing footing to avoid sinking ankle deep, and hoping the breeze doesn't shift direction. Here's a mainstream historical fact recognizing the crisis authorities did try. Oh, how they tried. Royal edicts rained down like the occasional insufficient downpour. King Louis XIV, himself the Sun King, bathing in Versailles' splendor, issued decrees demanding citizens clean the areas in front of their homes. They mandated the use of covered carts for transporting waste, a rule mostly ignored. They appointed official commissioners of filth, bless their hearts, tasked with inspecting streets and imposing fines. They even tried establishing designated dumping grounds outside the city walls. But enforcement was laughably weak, hampered by corruption, underfunding, and the sheer impossibility of the task. The commissioners were often local shopkeepers with zero authority or desire to find their neighbors. The fines, when levied, were rarely collected, the designated dumping grounds. They quickly overflowed, becoming just larger, more concentrated nightmares leaching into the soil and groundwater. It was bureaucracy wielding a feather duster against a tidal wave of sludge. Now, a quirky tidbit. Desperation breeds innovation, however strange. One peculiar, short-lived profession emerged: the professional vomiter. Seriously, in crowded taverns and bustling market squares overwhelmed by the ambient stench, some sensitive souls, or perhaps clever entrepreneurs, would pay a penny or two to a designated individual standing nearby with a large bucket. If the smells or sights became too much, and you felt your dinner threatening a reappearance, you could rush over, heave into the bucket, held by the vomiter, toss them a coin, and stumble away marginally relieved. It was a niche service born purely from the city's unbearable olfactory assault. You might spot one near the fishmonger's stalls looking bored, but ready their bucket, a grim badge of office. And here's where historians still argue were the repeated cleanup failures primarily due to genuine technological limitations of the era. No efficient waste removal systems, no understanding of bacteriology, or a profound lack of political will and civic responsibility. Some point to the rigid social hierarchies. The wealthy simply retreated behind their walls, perfumed their linens, and hired servants to carry chamber pots, utterly disconnected from the street-level crisis. The poor were too busy surviving to care about civic duty. Others argue the technology didn't exist to manage such density effectively. The concepts of public health engineering and germ theory were centuries away. Could any 17th century city government, no matter how well intentioned, have truly conquered this scale of filth without fundamental scientific and infrastructural advances? The debate simmers like a forgotten pot of street soup left in the sun. The frustration is palpable, a low hum beneath the city's usual racket. You hear arguments erupt daily, a shopkeeper yelling at a neighbor for dumping ashes too close to his door, a housewife shrieking as a chamber pot's contents splash too near her drying laundry. The constant low-grade anger simmers. People track muck everywhere, into homes, shops, even churches. Disease isn't an abstract threat. It's a neighbor who was fine yesterday burning with fever today. The connection between the filth and the sickness feels intuitive, terrifying. Prayers for deliverance mingle with curses against the lazy commissioner or the stinking pile down the lane. The city feels like a pressure cooker, the stench, the steam, the filth, the fuel. The mountains of garbage aren't just eyesores, they are monuments to collective failure, ticking time bombs of pestilence. The rag pickers pick the commissioners, sigh, the edicts gather dust. Something has to give. The air itself feels heavy with anticipation, thick with the promise of a breaking point. The desperate authorities, backed into a corner by plague scares and the sheer overwhelming daily tide of filth, are about to consider an idea so audacious, so seemingly simple, yet fraught with unintended consequences. An idea involving thousands of hungry mouths and very little regard for where they might wander. The solution, when it finally snuffles onto the scene, is decidedly porcine dot. The frustration curdles into desperation, thick as the scum on the scent. You hear the murmurs first rippling through the market crowds like a bad smell carried on a sudden breeze. Whispers in tavern corners, muttered arguments between magistrates, echoing in drafty guild halls. The mountains of refuse mock every half-hearted cleanup effort. Plague scares send fresh waves of panic through the cramped quarters. Something drastic is needed. Something cheap. Something hungry. And then the decree arrives, nailed to a church door already layered with older, ignored proclamations. It's audacious, it's borderline ludicrous, it's pure bureaucratic desperation release. The pigs. The logic on parchment at least seems flawless. Pigs are nature's perfect disposal units. They'll eat anything. Vegetable peelings, spoiled grain fish, guts, awful, rotten fruit even. Well, the less savory components of the street soup. They convert waste into useful meat and lard. Best of all, they work for free. No salaries for pig walkers yet, mind you. The grand plan is simply to unleash thousands of swine onto the streets, letting them roam freely like fuzzy, four-legged sanitation engineers. City officials, likely perfumed gentlemen viewing the chaos from carriage windows, envision a self-regulating cleanup force. The pigs eat the filth, grow fat, get butchered, and the cycle continues. Problem solved. What could possibly go wrong? Here's a mainstream historical fact. This wasn't some isolated crackpot idea. In the late 1630s and early 1640s, facing mounting pressure, Parisian authorities actively encouraged and likely subsidized the mass introduction of pigs into the city center, specifically as waste disposers. It was official policy born of utter exasperation. Records mentioned designated areas where pigs were to be concentrated, but the reality quickly became far more fluid. Think less targeted deployment, more porcine invasion. Now a quirky tidbit. Not just any pig would do for this grand urban experiment. Authorities had definite preferences. Forget the giant, slow-moving breeds. They favored smaller, nimbler types. Razorbacks or similar hardy, quick-footed pigs, known for their aggressive foraging and ability to squeeze through tight spaces. Ideal for navigating crowded alleys and diving headfirst into refuse piles. Imagine hundreds, then thousands of these determined, snuffling garbage missiles suddenly unleashed. Their arrival wasn't marked by fanfare, but by a sudden, overwhelming chorus of grunt squeals and the relentless wet snuff of snouts plowing through muck. The soundtrack of the city acquires a distinctly porcine baseline overnight. And here's where historians still argue, whose idea was this? Really, was it a genuine, if misguided innovation proposed by a forward-thinking or simply overwhelmed city planner? Or was it a cynical cost-cutting measure pushed by Treasury officials looking to slash sanitation budgets, utterly divorced from the reality of unleashing thousands of large, unpredictable animals into crowded urban streets. Some point to precedents in smaller towns or monastic communities where pigs handled waste, arguing the scale was the fatal flaw. Others see it as pure administrative panic, a knee-jerk reaction with zero thought for consequences, championed by officials who never had to dodge a hungry sow on their way to buy bread. The debate grunts on much like the pigs themselves. You witness the invasion firsthand. One morning, the familiar refuse mountain near the bakers is moving. A seething mass of pink and brown hides, bristly backs, and curling tails churns within the pile. Pigs. Dozens of them, snouts deep, grunting with porcine delight as they root through vegetable scraps and fish bones with terrifying efficiency. They devour a cabbage core in seconds, crunch oyster shells like candy, slurp up greasy puddles you wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. For a fleeting moment, there's a bizarre sense of relief. Look, they're eating it? The pile visibly shrinks. A ragged cheer might even go up from a shopkeeper whose doorstep is finally visible. The sheer speed of their consumption is startling. They are living, breathing, incredibly effective garbage disposals. The city's great gamble seems initially to be paying off. The air even smells different. Not good exactly, but less overwhelmingly rotten, mixed now with the earthy, musky scent of pig and the sound of contented chewing. But the relief is short-lived. Because pigs, brilliant as they are at eating waste, are not exactly known for their civic-mindedness or spatial awareness. That nimble little razorback who just demolished a pile of carrot tops? She's finished, and now she's trotting purposefully down the street. Mud-caked trotters clicking on the stones, heading straight for the vegetable stall next door, or the pile of neatly stacked firewood outside the cooper's shop, or the leg of your own slightly too nice breeches as you stand frozen watching the porcine tide roll in. The free-roaming part of the plan is about to collide spectacularly with the realities of 17th-century Parisian life. The era of the professional pig walker isn't born from foresight, but from the sheer chaotic, ankle-biting necessity that's snuffling its way towards you right now, leaving a trail of trampled greens and startled curses in its wake. The solution has arrived hungry and effective, but utterly magnificently uncontrolled dot. The initial wave of porcine efficiency crashes hard against the jagged rocks of reality. You quickly learn that a pig, once it finishes devouring its chosen pile of filth, doesn't politely vanish. No, it becomes a mobile hazard unit. Imagine navigating the already treacherous street-dodging carts, sidestepping puddles of dubious origin weaving through crowds, only to have a determined mud-splattered sow weighing as much as a small barrel suddenly burst from an alleyway snout down charging straight across your path. You stumble back heart-pounding as she blurs past utterly oblivious, her trotters skidding on wet cobbles heading towards the tantalizing scent of spilled oats near the grain merchant stall. The sheer unpredictability becomes a constant low-level stress. One moment you're haggling over candles, the next you're leaping sideways as a trio of young piglets squealing with glee tumble out of a collapsing pile of discarded cabbage leaves right onto the street. The accidents start piling up faster than the garbage ever did. You see it happen near the tanner's yard, a portly merchant, arms laden with bolts of expensive silk, stepping off the slightly raised walkway, his polished boot landing squarely on a discarded melon rind, just as a large, preoccupied boar shuffles directly into his path. Down goes the merchant silk, unfurling into the muck, a symphony of ripping fabric, porcine grunts, and very human swearing echoing off the walls. The boar, startled, gives an indignant squeal, nips at the flailing merchant's ankle, more insult than injury, but terrifying nonetheless, and trots off, leaving chaos in its wake. Sprained ankles, torn clothing, scattered goods, and bruised dignity become daily occurrences. Children shriek with laughter or genuine fear as pigs root unexpectedly beneath their feet. Elderly folks clutch walls for dear life, eyeing the street with newfound terror. The city's ancient, uneven paving stones, treacherous enough on their own, become obstacle courses strewn with living, grunting trip hazards. Here's a mainstream historical fact: complaints flooded the authorities. Official records from the 1640s detail a surge in grievances filed by butchers whose valuable scraps vanished down porcine gullets before they could be collected. Market vendors whose stalls were routinely upended, or pilfered carters whose horses were spooked by charging pigs and ordinary citizens simply trying not to break their necks. The archives paint a vivid picture of civic disruption. One notable case involved a prominent lawyer who sued a pig owner after a sow allegedly knocked him into a particularly foul gutter, ruining his new periwig and dignity. The case dragged on for months, a testament to the escalating tensions. Now a quirky tidbit, pig theft became an art form. These free-roaming garbage disposers were also technically valuable walking larders. Opportunistic thieves developed ingenious and brazen methods. One popular trick involved draping a stolen pig with a large sack, or even a stolen cloak, making it resemble a hunched, slow-moving beggar, or a lumpy bundle being carried. The thief would then casually guide their disguised prize through crowded streets towards the city gates, or a discreet butcher. Another method used specially trained quiet dogs to herd a pig away from its usual haunt under cover of darkness. Finding your prize-winning garbage disposal unit vanished overnight became a common lament among the poorer citizens who'd invested in the city's porcine solution. And here's where historians still argue, was the sheer volume of pigs the primary problem, or was it the fundamental nature of the beast itself? Some scholars point to contemporary accounts describing specific rogue pigs known for aggressive behavior or particular skill in causing havoc, suggesting individual animal temperament played a role. Others argue pigs are inherently unsuited to dense urban environments. Their foraging instinct is indiscriminate. Their spatial awareness poor, and their reaction to confinement or frustration often involves charging or biting. Was the plan doomed from the start because its architects fundamentally misunderstood pig psychology and behavior in crowded spaces? The debate continues, much like the arguments that must have erupted daily over trampled vegetable patches. The property damage escalates from annoying to infuriating. That meticulously tended herb garden outside the apothecaries, reduced to churned mud and trampled stalks by midnight marauding pigs seeking tasty roots. The carefully stacked barrels outside the vintners, toppled by a boar using them as a scratching post. The wooden fence around the baker's yard splintered by pigs determined to reach the warm, yeasty smells of discarded dough. The low stone wall bordering a wealthy merchant's courtyard undermined and partially collapsed by pigs rooting for grubs in the soft earth beneath it. Every morning brings fresh evidence of porcine trespass. The grumbling in the taverns grows louder, angrier. Shopkeepers start keeping stout sticks by their doors. The initial novelty of seeing the garbage piles shrink has utterly vanished, replaced by a pervasive sense of siege. The pigs are everywhere. Underfoot around corners in your yard, eating your livelihood, tripping your grandmother, and leaving distinct, pungent calling cards on every marginally clean surface. The city's great grunting gamble isn't just failing, it's actively backfiring, transforming the streets from merely filthy battlegrounds into chaotic, hazardous obstacle courses ruled by hungry, oblivious, four-legged tanks. The public outcry isn't a murmur anymore. It's a rising roar demanding anyone get these walking disasters under control. The solution created a new, far more animate problem, and the pressure for a solution to that problem is building faster than the pigs can eat. The stage is set not for more edicts, but for the birth of a whole new, utterly bizarre profession born purely from porcine pandemonium. The roar of public outrage finally cracks through the administrative haze. Something must be done. Not another grand, doomed decree from perfumed officials safely ensconced in their studies, but action. Immediate action, and necessity, that relentless mother of invention, gives birth not to a gadget, but to a whole new breed of urban survivor, the pig walker. You see the first ones emerge not with fanfare, but with the weary determination of men stepping into a war zone. They appear at dawn, figures still hazy in the mist rising from the damp cobbles, clutching lengths of coarse rope, sometimes just sturdy leather straps salvaged from broken harnesses. Their tools are simple, almost laughably inadequate against the porcine tide. A leash may be a short, blunt prod, often just a sturdy stick, and a voice they're still learning to use with authority. There's no official decree creating this job, no royal charter. It happens organically, desperately. Pig owners, mostly poorer citizens who'd invested their meager savings in these living garbage disposals hoping for a fattened return, suddenly realize their assets are liabilities. Their prized porker isn't just eating free garbage. It's trampling a merchant stall, potentially incurring crippling fines, or vanishing into the clutches of a clever thief. Butchering it prematurely is a loss. Letting it roam is financial suicide, so they hire muscle or rope, or whatever local lad looks strong enough or desperate enough to wrestle a determined sow away from a pile of discarded lace. It starts small. A neighbor's nephew paid a few sous to keep old Gertrude from digging up the cobbler's prized tulips. A widow offering stew in exchange for someone escorting her two piglets to the productive muck heap near the tannery and back. It's piecework born of pure, unadulterated need. Here's a mainstream historical fact. By the mid-1640s, the presence of these early controllers becomes noticeable enough that the floundering authorities attempt to codify it. Regulations start appearing, not banning the pigs outright yet, but demanding they be controlled. Leashes become mandatory within certain districts, especially near markets and major thoroughfares. Fines are threatened again, sporadically enforced for owners whose pigs cause damage while unattended. This clumsy legislation essentially legitimizes the burgeoning profession by default. Suddenly, having your pig walked isn't just sensible, it's becoming the law. The free-range garbage disposal experiment is officially over. Control is the new frantic imperative, now a quirky tidbit. The first pig walkers were masters of improvisation. Leashes broke constantly, so they became experts in knots, intricate hitches that could secure a thrashing leg or a surprisingly strong neck without choking the beast. A dead pig was worthless. Prods snapped. They learned which types of wood ash oak could withstand a sharp sideways kick from a frustrated hog. They discovered that certain sounds worked better than others. A sharp whistle might startle a pig into stopping. A low guttural grunt could sometimes mimic a dominant sow and halt a charging juvenile. They even learned rudimentary pig psychology. Blocking a direct path often worked better than pulling directly against a pig's formidable strength. They became, in essence, the first urban animal behaviorists armed with rope and desperation. And here's where historians still argue: were the earliest pig walkers primarily hired directly by individual pig owners? Or did a more organized system emerge quickly, perhaps funded by neighborhood collectives or even grudgingly by the city authorities trying to contain the chaos? Some parish records hint at communal funds being used to pay for shared pig walking services in particularly afflicted areas. Other scholars point to the sheer poverty of many pig owners, arguing they could barely feed themselves, let alone hire help, suggesting walkers were only employed by slightly wealthier citizens or butchers who owned multiple pigs. The exact economic structure of this sudden, vital, and utterly unglamorous profession remains frustratingly opaque, lost in the muck of daily survival. You witness the awkward early days of control. See that young man near the fishmongers. He's maybe 16, all elbows and knees, holding a rope attached to a sow easily twice his weight. The pig lunges towards a pile of glistening fish heads. The boy plants his feet, leans back with all his might, digging his worn heels into the grimy stones, uttering a strained, "Whoa, whoa, Bessie," that sounds more like a plea than a command. The sow hesitates, sniffs the air, then gives a mighty tug. The boy stumbles forward, saved from face-planting into the fish guts only by wrapping the rope around a nearby post. It's a comical, slightly terrifying dance of wills. Over by the tanner's vats, an older man, face-lined and hands calloused, uses his prod not to poke but to gently block. He steps sideways, intercepting a boar's direct line to some tempting leather scraps, murmuring a low, repetitive sound. Hup, hup, hup. That seems to register. The boar pauses, grunts, sniffs the prod, then reluctantly changes course. It's less brute force, more strategic nudging. A delicate ballet performed in mud-splattered boots. The difference is immediate, palpable. The sheer random terror of unchallenged pigs diminishes. You no longer flinch at every alley mouth expecting a charging hog. You see the walkers, easily identified by their muddy trousers, the ever-present rope coiled at their belt, the wary set of their shoulders, acting as a buffer between the porcine appetite and the fragile order of human commerce. They become traffic directors for hog shepherds of snouts. The chaotic grunting symphony begins to acquire a semblance of rhythm, punctuated by the walkers' shouts, whistles, and the occasional frustrated curse muffled by gritted teeth. It's messy, it's improvised, it's far from perfect, but it's control. A fragile, rope-thin leash on chaos. The era of the professional pig walker has dawned, born not from planning, but from the desperate need to stop a city from being literally eaten and trampled by its own unconventional solution. They are the frontline defense against porcine anarchy, the unsung and likely underpaid pioneers navigating the stinking trenches of urban innovation. And their day, you quickly realize, is only just beginning. A dawn to dusk marathon of mud muscle and managing the unmanageable dot. Dawn bleeds gray and damp over the rooftops as you join the early shift. Your hand closes around the leash. Not smooth leather, but coarse tarred hemp rope thick as your thumb. It's already stiff with yesterday's mud smelling of wet fiber pig sweat and something vaguely earthy and sour. This is your primary tool, your literal lifeline to several hundred pounds of single-minded appetite. You quickly learn its brutal physics, wrap it around your forearm for leverage, but not too tight. Because when Bartholomew, your assigned charge, a barrel-shaped boar with suspiciously intelligent eyes, decides a pile of rotting melons across the street is worth investigating, the sudden jerk could dislocate your shoulder or peel the skin from your palms. You develop calluses in strange places, the inside of your thumb, the ridge of your palm below your fingers, the meaty pad where the rope bites deepest during a tug of war. The rope isn't just for leading, it's for anchoring, redirecting. And occasionally when Bartholomew gets particularly ambitious near a merchant's open stall door for sheer desperate hauling, the prod is next. Yours is a simple affair. A stout oak branch about the length of your arm, whittled smooth at the grip end, blunt and slightly rounded at the business end. No sharp points. The goal isn't to injure but to suggest. A firm tap on the shoulder, a nudge against a flank. A blocking motion placed firmly in the path of an unwanted detour. You see other walkers with more elaborate tools. One has lashed a worn leather pad to the end. Another uses what looks suspiciously like a discarded door hinge fixed to a pole, creating a crude, blunt hook for better leverage. It's an extension of your arm, a way to communicate with a creature that speaks only in grunts, squeals, and stubborn momentum. You learn its weight, its balance. You also learn where not to prod. The sensitive snout invites a lightning-fast, surprisingly painful nip. The hindquarters risk a powerful mudslinging kick. It's less a weapon, more a porcine negotiation device. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The tools of the pig walker were defined by brutal practicality and poverty. Leashes were almost universally made of cheap, sturdy hemp rope, sometimes recycled from ships or farms. Wooden prods were the norm, often fashioned from scavenged branches or broken tool handles. Metal was expensive and largely reserved for buckles on slightly fancier harnesses, used by the rare walker managing multiple pigs for a wealthy butcher. These weren't crafted artifacts. They were tools born of immediate need, constantly repaired, replaced, and adapted on the fly. Their simplicity is a stark contrast to the complex, often decorative tools of other contemporary trades. Now, a quirky tidbit. The most sophisticated tool in the pig walker's arsenal wasn't tangible at all, it was their voice. Every successful walker developed a unique vocabulary of grunts, whistles, clicks, and short, sharp words. It was a pidgin language understood only by them and their charges. You might hear a low, rhythmic hup 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 to encourage forward motion, a sharp staccato ksht to halt a rising weep to call a wandering piglet back. Some walkers claimed certain pigs responded better to specific tones. A higher pitch for skittish sows, a deeper rumble for stubborn boars. It was an oral tradition passed between walkers in grimy tavern corners, a secret code for managing the unmanageable. Imagine the soundscape, the city's usual din overlaid with this bizarre symphony of human-pig communication, echoing down grimy lanes. And here's where historians still argue, did walkers develop distinct regional dialects, or calls within Paris recognizable to other walkers, and perhaps even the pigs themselves in different quarters? Some scholars studying parish records and satirical writings of the era suggest the distinctive calls of the cité walkers might have differed subtly from those in the Marais, or near the Halles, shaped by local pig breeds' dominant waist types, or even the acoustics of specific street layouts. Others dismiss this, arguing the core sounds were universal necessities and any variations were simply individual quirks lost to time. The debate, much like a pig's attention span, remains scattered. You settle into the rhythm, or rather Bartholomew sets the rhythm and you follow. The leash is a constant subtle tension in your hand, a telegraph wire conveying his intentions. A slight increase in pull means he's spotted something promising. A spill of grain near the miller's, a pile of vegetable trimmings behind the cookshop. A sudden slackness might mean he's stopped to investigate a particularly intriguing smell, usually something foul or worse, decided to lie down for an impromptu wallow in a convenient mud puddle. You learn to read the set of his ears, forward equal sign focused interest, flattened back, equal sign annoyance or determination, the angle of his snout, the twitch of his tail. The prod becomes an extension of your will. A gentle pressure on his left flank guides him. Right a tap on his right shoulder steers him left. It's a constant low-level negotiation. A dance of nudges and tugs punctuated by your guttural commands and his responding grunts. You see the tools in action everywhere. Near the baker's, a walker uses his prod not to push, but to block the entrance to an alley where tempting bread smells drift while his companion deftly loops a rope around the hind leg of a pig trying to bolt for it. Over by the tanner's vats, another walker employs a series of sharp whistles to keep 3 piglets corralled and moving away from the dangerous ammonia-rich runoff. The tools are crude, the methods improvised, but they represent a hard-won mastery over the chaos unleashed by the city's grand plan. The rope burns your palm, the prod feels heavy as the day wears on your throat, grows raw from the constant unnatural vocalizations. But you are no longer just reacting to porcine whims. You are, however, tenuously imposing order. Your tools are simple extensions of your body and voice worn smooth by necessity, and the endless grunting struggle against the tide of filth and porcine appetite. They are the unglamorous instruments of a very peculiar urban peace held in hands already stained and calloused by the realities of guiding Paris towards a slightly less hazardous, slightly less trampled, but still profoundly smelly tomorrow. While nobles fondle porcelain snuff boxes and scholars quill pens, your hands grip tarred hemp and splintered oak. The essential gritty tools of the garbage frontier. Dawn isn't a gentle awakening. It's the scrape of stiff boots on cold stone, the ache in shoulders already protesting yesterday's battles, and the immediate pungent assault of pig musk mixed with the city's baseline reek. Your day begins before the sun properly crests the crooked rooflines, joining a ragged procession of other walkers, materializing from shadowed doorways and cramped lodgings. There's no camaraderie, just a shared, bleary-eyed resignation. You collect Bartholomew from his owner's cramped backyard pen, a space smelling fiercely of pig-damp earth and yesterday's slops. The boar greets you not with affection, but with an impatient grunt and a shove of his powerful snout against the gate. The leash clicks onto his makeshift collar, often just a loop of tougher rope, and the marathon begins. This isn't a stroll. It's a relentless dawn-to-dusk slog through the city's digestive tract. Your primary directive: keep Bartholomew eating productively and prevent him from causing expensive chaos. This means constant, exhausting vigilance. Your eyes scan constantly, ahead for tempting piles of waste he shouldn't touch, like the rancid offal pile behind the butcher's, strictly reserved for that butcher's pigs to the sides for open shop doors, or vulnerable stacks of goods behind for opportunistic thieves or stray dogs that might spook him. Your ears strain through the city's din for the telltale sounds of porcine trouble, the sharp crack of splintering wood, the outraged shriek of a merchant, the panicked squeal of another pig getting too close. Your muscles are perpetually engaged, ready to brace, pull, or nudge. The rope is a live wire in your hand, telegraphing Bartholomew's every impulse. A strong, sustained pull means he's locked onto something good, maybe a heap of vegetable trimmings behind a cookshop. You allow it, guiding him close, using your prod to keep him focused, stopping him from barging into the kitchen. A sudden, sharp jerk. He's spotted something forbidden, a basket of fresh apples tumbled from a cart. You plant your feet, lean back hard, rope biting into your palm, hissing halt, with as much authority as your tired lungs can muster. It's a full-body workout repeated hundreds of times a day. Here's a mainstream historical fact surviving records hint at the brutal hours. Pig walkers were often contracted from dawn until dusk, literally sun up to sundown, with perhaps a brief unpaid break if they were lucky. Wages were notoriously low, often just a few sous a day, plus maybe a meager meal. Thin stew, coarse bread, placing them firmly among the city's poorest laborers. Their pay reflected the job's low status and the desperation of those who took it. They were essential infrastructure, yet treated as disposable. Now, a quirky tidbit. The constant immersion in muck and pig led to a unique occupational hazard: permanently urine-stained trousers. Pigs relieve themselves frequently, copiously, and seemingly indiscriminately. A walker standing close, guiding pulling, inevitably ended each day with the lower half of his trousers soaked through, not just with mud, but with pig urine, dried stiff and reeking. It became such a notorious mark of the profession that attempts to wash it out were largely futile. Over time, the fabric itself would degrade and yellow. You could often spot a pig walker blocks away even out of context by the distinct ammonia-tinged aroma and the telltale stiff, discolored state of their leggings. It was a walking, stinking badge of dishonor. Forget fancy guild insignias. This was their uniform. And here's where historians still argue, did the sheer physical and olfactory stigma of the job create a distinct social underclass within the already lowly ranks of manual laborers? Were pig walkers actively shunned even by other poor workers? Ditch diggers, rag pickers, street sweepers, due to their pervasive stench and association with such ignoble, messy work. Some parish records and contemporary satires suggest yes, depicting walkers as figures of particular ridicule and avoidance. Others argue that in the desperate struggle of 17th-century poverty, any job was a job, and the shunning was more humorous exaggeration than harsh reality. The debate lingers much like the scent of the job itself. The sensory toll is unrelenting. The smell of pig musky earthy, sharp with urine and dung, clings to your skin, your hair, your clothes. It seeps into your pores. You stop noticing it yourself, but you see the reactions of the wrinkled noses as you pass the subtle step back, the way tavern keepers might serve you last holding the coin you hand them, with fingertips only. The grime isn't just underfoot, it's on you. Mud splatters your boots and legs with every step Bartholomew takes through a puddle. Dust and finer particles of dried waste coat your skin, mingling with sweat. You feel perpetually gritty-stained and pungent. The physical exhaustion is bone deep. Your shoulders ache from the constant tension on the rope. Your back protests from bending, twisting, bracing. Your feet throb in worn boots on unforgiving stone. Your hands are a map of rope burns, blisters, and calluses. And always the low-grade tension of vigilance wears on your nerves. A moment's lapse could mean Bartholomew demolishing a merchant's display of pottery or knocking over an old woman carrying her market purchases. The threat of fines, docked pay, or outright dismissal hangs heavy. You grab a brief respite near midday, slumped against a relatively clean stretch of wall in a less trafficked alley, gnawing on a hunk of stale bread. Bartholomew temporarily sated roots half-heartedly nearby. Other walkers might drift nearby sharing a water skin, exchanging weary nods or muttered complaints about a particularly stubborn charge. There's no glamour here, no pride in the work, just the grim satisfaction of surviving another half-day. You see the toll etched on faces, the premature lines, the ingrained dirt, the hollow look of men perpetually on the edge of exhaustion. The low pay means poor food, cramped, unsanitary lodgings, and constant vulnerability to illness. A bad cold could mean days without pay, a disaster. An injury from a kick or a bite, potentially catastrophic. You are the human shock absorber between the city's waste solution and its fragile social order, paid pennies to wade through filth and wrestle livestock, your only reward, the deepening ache in your bones and a stench that soap cannot conquer. The sun beats down or the rain slicks the stones, but the rhythm continues. Tug nudge, scan pull, grunt. The afternoon stretches ahead, vast and exhausting, a mirror of the morning promising only more muck, more muscle strain, and the slow, grinding erosion of dignity under the indifferent gaze of a city that needs your thankless labor but wishes you'd do it somewhere else. The walker's reality isn't a job. It's a daylight to dusk endurance test measured in rope burns, aching muscles, and the ever-present inescapable perfume of pig dot. The leash isn't just a connection to Bartholomew, it's a brand. You feel it the moment you step onto the busier thoroughfares. The market crowd doesn't part for you, it recoils. It's subtle at first, a wrinkled nose, a slight tightening of shoulders as you pass eyes deliberately averted. Then it becomes overt, a finely dressed merchant, ushering his wife aside with a protective hand, muttering "porcher" under his breath. Pigman. A group of apprentices emboldened by ale, even this early, pointing and snickering, mimicking a pig's snort as you trudge past. Children, wide-eyed, are pulled back by anxious mothers, warned away from the man who smells of the gutter and the beasts he guides. The rope in your hand might as well be a chain marking you as untouchable. You are necessary, yes, essential even for the fragile peace. but you are also walking contamination, a mobile reminder of the city's dirty underbelly it desperately tries to perfume away. The hierarchy is brutal and unspoken. At the bottom, naturally, are you and your fellow walkers. Above you barely might be the rag pickers, their work also filthy, but perhaps less animal. Then the street sweepers, the ditch diggers, the knackers, dealing with dead horses. All grim trades, yet none carry quite the visceral porcine stench, or the association with chaotic beasts in civilized spaces. You see it in the taverns, trying to enter a moderately respectable establishment after your shift is futile. The landlord blocks the doorway, hand raised, nose wrinkled. No, out back? The yard! He grunts, pointing. You get served rough cider or cheap sour wine in a chipped mug, away from the paying customers, inside your coin accepted with fingertips wiped immediately on an apron. Even the other laborers drinking inside might avert their gaze. Your presence is an affront, a disruption to the fragile illusion of order and cleanliness they cling to. You eat alone, perched on an overturned barrel in a muddy courtyard, the smell of your own clothes mingling with the tavern's kitchen slops piled nearby. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The social stigma was codified in surprising ways. Guilds, powerful institutions governing trades, often explicitly barred members from employing pig walkers or even associating too closely with them. Records show butchers' guilds, despite relying indirectly on the pig's waste consumption, imposing fines on members whose walkers caused disturbances or whose pigs were deemed too poorly controlled. Certain public baths refused entry to walkers. Even some churches relegated them to specific, less desirable sections during Mass, fearing their odor would offend wealthier parishioners. Their essential work granted them precisely zero social capital, now a quirky tidbit. The pervasive odor led to a bizarre form of social alchemy. Some walkers, desperate for a shred of dignity, or perhaps just a moment's peace from the jeers, experimented with crude perfumes and strong-smelling herbs. They'd rub crushed mint rosemary or even pungent garlic on their necks and wrists, or tuck sachets of lavender stolen from gardens, or bought cheaply at market's end into their belts. The result: an unholy olfactory cocktail, floral top notes battling the deep, persistent baseline of pig musk and ammonia. It didn't mask the smell, it complicated it, creating a uniquely nauseating signature. Imagine catching a whiff of lavender as you turn a corner, only to have it instantly swamped by the eye-watering tang of dried pig urine. It was a losing battle, a fragrant surrender that often drew even more ridicule. Smelling like a perfumed pigsty became a common insult. And here's where historians still argue, did this profound stigma extend beyond the walkers themselves to their families? Were wives and children of pig walkers also shunned at market, excluded from community gatherings, or barred from certain schools or apprenticeships? Parish records are frustratingly silent on this intimate fallout. Some scholars argue the taint was personal, confined to the worker. Others, citing the era's rigid social structures and the concept of family honor, suggest the shame was collective. A stain passed down like a bad heirloom, dooming children to the same lowly rung. The lack of direct evidence leaves this particular misery open to interpretation, a shadow clinging to the historical record. The discrimination manifests in countless small corrosive ways. Finding decent lodgings is nearly impossible. Landlords take one look and sniff and slam the door. You end up in a cramped, airless room above a tannery. Ironically, another malodorous trade, but at least their stink is considered industrious, sharing space with two other walkers, the air thick with the mingled reek of pig sweat and curing hides. Getting credit at the baker's, forget it. Your sous are counted twice. Your bread is always the stalest end of the loaf. When a cart splashes you with mud from the central gutter, the carter laughs, shouting, "Fits the uniform," instead of apologizing. Even attempts at basic courtesy are rebuffed. Offering a hand to help an old woman who slipped. She recoils as if you're offering poison, scrambling away with surprising speed, muttering prayers under her breath. You are the city's necessary sin, tolerated only because the alternative, unchecked, porcine chaos is demonstrably worse. Your labor buys a semblance of order, but it buys you no respect, no comfort, no place at the communal table. The weight of it settles deeper than the physical fatigue. It's a constant low-grade humiliation, a knowledge written in every averted gaze, every curled lip. You perform a vital, grueling service navigating the treacherous intersection of filth and appetite, preventing property damage and public mayhem, yet you're treated as less than the dirt you tread on. The stench clinging to you is more than just odor. It's a social barrier, thicker than the city walls. You walk Bartholomew through streets that reject you, past houses you could never enter, among people who see only the grime and the beast, never the weary man holding the rope. The leash binds you to more than just a pig. It binds you to the very bottom rung, where the air is thick with scorn and the only view is upwards at a society that holds its nose as you pass. The city uses your strength, your endurance, your tolerance for stink and strain, and repays you with isolation and contempt. The pig walker keeps the streets manageable, but the cost is measured in dignity paid daily in the small, sharp coin of disdain. And Bartholomew oblivious grunts contentedly as he roots up a particularly promising clump of something unspeakable, dragging you deeper into the mire that defines your existence, both literal and social. The rope chafes your palm, a constant reminder of the invisible, far more painful rope that chafes your soul. The butcher glares from his stall, not at the pig, but at you. The rope burns ache. Bartholomew's stubborn pull feels like dragging an anchor through molasses, and the midday sun bakes the street soup into a potent vapor. Desperation, that relentless tutor, starts whispering solutions. You can't force Bartholomew. He outweighs you and possesses the subtlety of a battering ram. But you can outthink him. Slowly, painfully, through trial and error, mostly error involving trampled flower beds and irate cheesemongers, you begin to map the city not by its grand landmarks, but by its garbage flows and porcine psychology. You become a strategist of filth, a general navigating the trenches of appetite. First, the roots. The direct way from Madame Leclerc's yard, where Bartholomew lodges, to the productive muck heap behind the Guildhall kitchens is a straight line. And a disaster. It passes the notoriously irritable silk merchant's open display, the cooper's tempting pile of wood shavings, and the Widow Dubois' prize-winning and utterly defenseless geraniums. Instead, you discover the Snout Alley detour, a longer, smellier, but safer path. It winds down a perpetually damp, narrow alley where the tanner's runoff creates a sludge Bartholomew dislikes, crossing quickly past the chandler's back wall, where discarded tallow lumps provide acceptable distraction, and emerges behind the Guildhall midden, bypassing all major temptations. It adds 10 minutes, but saves 10 sous in potential fines. You learn other walkers' secret paths: the buttermilk bypass, avoiding the market square, the piss trench passage, utilizing a foul-smelling runoff ditch. Pigs actively avoid lingering near. The city transforms from an obstacle course into a labyrinth where waste flows and porcine preferences dictate your turns. Here's a mainstream historical fact. This intricate knowledge became a walker's most valuable intangible asset. While no formal maps existed, experienced walkers developed mental blueprints of optimal routes based on time of day. Market crowds, delivery carts? Whether rain washed some smells away, amplified others, and even the type of waste deposited where. Knowing that the fishmongers tossed guts before noon, making that alley hazardous until scavenged, or that the baker dumped stale bread crusts after the lunch rush near the stables, was crucial intelligence. This specialized spatial awareness was passed down informally, a hidden geography known only to those who navigated it daily with grunting charges. Now, a quirky tidbit distraction became a high art. Carrying actual treats was impractical and expensive, so walkers improvised olfactory decoys. A common trick involved pocketing a particularly pungent item found early in the shift: a chunk of rotten cheese rind, a clump of rancid fat, a piece of moldy bread soaked in cheap wine. When faced with an unavoidable high temptation zone, like passing the open door of a bustling cook shop, the walker would subtly toss this stink bait away from the danger zone down a side alley or into a relatively harmless gutter. Bartholomew, nostrils flaring at the powerful familiar odor of decay, would often divert his attention towards the decoy long enough to be guided past the real threat. It was garbage judo, using the pig's own powerful sense of smell against him. You might see a walker casually flick a slimy something into a shadowed doorway, then quickly steer his pig onward, the animal momentarily baffled but distracted. And here's where historians still argue: how widespread and effective were these ingenious tactics really? Were they the mark of a skilled, experienced walker, or desperate flailing employed by all? Some scholars point to the continued high number of complaints and incidents recorded suggesting these methods were hit or miss, limited by the pig's unpredictable nature. Others argue the complaints represent the failures, while the countless uneventful passages guided by these tricks simply went unrecorded. Was this ingenuity a sophisticated coping mechanism honed over time, or just the chaotic improvisation of the perpetually overwhelmed? The evidence, like a discarded decoy, remains tantalizingly ambiguous. You master the power of the strategic pause. Bartholomew fixates on the overflowing scrap bucket outside the pie shop. Instead of a futile tug-of-war, you spot a patch of unusually soft, cool mud in a shaded doorway 10 paces ahead. You gently nudge him towards it. "Look, Bartholomew!" Your tone is almost conspiratorial, prime wallowing. He sniffs, grunts, and with porcine delight, flops down into the mud, grunting contentedly, momentarily forgetting the pie scraps. You lean against the wall, catching your breath, letting him indulge for a precious minute. It's not progress, but it's damage limitation. You use the environment. A tight alleyway naturally slows him down. A sun-warmed stone wall becomes a scratching post. You allow him to use buying time to plan the next move. You learn his quirks, his inexplicable fear of flapping laundry, his strange fondness for the smell of wet mortar. You exploit them ruthlessly. Flapping laundry near the weavers, that's your new shortcut. Passing a building site, you slow down, letting him snuffle the fresh lime, knowing it calms him. You observe other walkers, these unsung urban tacticians. See old Jacques near the river? He doesn't fight his three sows when they bunch up and try to bolt for the waterweed. He lets them reach the bank, knowing the steep, slick slope will slow them down naturally, then uses their momentary confusion to rope them back onto the path. Martha, the only female walker you've seen, guides her skittish young gilt, using rhythmic taps on her hindquarters with a willow switch. Not hard, just a steady tap, 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 like a metronome keeping the animal moving at a steady, controllable pace. It's a symphony of small manipulations, a constant low-level negotiation with chaos. The tools are simple. Rope prod, voice, but the application is nuanced, born from hours of sweat frustration and observing the enemy, who also happens to be your charge. The ingenuity isn't glamorous, it's mud-splattered and reeks of compromise. It's avoiding disaster rather than achieving glory. But in the relentless grind of the pig walker's day, these small victories, the successful detour, the effective decoy, the well-timed wallow, are everything. They carve moments of precarious control from the jaws of porcine anarchy. They turn brute endurance into something resembling skill. A hard-won, malodorous skill practiced not in guild halls but in the gutters. Its only reward the absence of catastrophe and the grudging temporary obedience of a creature whose sole purpose is to eat and whose primary talent is causing trouble. You guide Bartholomew onto the relative safety of the Snout Alley detour, the familiar stench of the tanner's runoff acting like a repellent barrier. He grunts less resistant now. You've learned his city, and in doing so, you've carved out the tiniest sliver of mastery over your own miserable existence. The rope still chafes, but the path for now is yours, Dot. That fragile sense of control shatters like cheap pottery dropped on cobblestones. One moment you're guiding Bartholomew past the relative calm of the chandler's yard, the rhythmic tap-tap of your prod keeping him on course. The next, a mangy street dog ribs stark against its hide darts from an alleyway, barking hysterically at Bartholomew's heels. The boar, startled from his placid snuffling, explodes. It's not anger, it's pure porcine panic. A guttural scream tears from his throat, unnervingly human in its terror. He spins, muscles bunching under his bristly hide, blind to everything but the perceived threat. His shoulder slams into your thigh with the force of a falling sack of grain. Pain blooms sharp and deep as you stagger sideways, the rope whipping through your grip, burning raw skin. Bartholomew bolts, dragging you stumbling, half falling down the alley after the fleeing dog. Your world becomes a blur of jolting cobbles, the terrified shrieks of the pig, the frantic barking, and the sickening certainty that you've lost him. This is the razor's edge you walk between order and utter destructive chaos. One spooked pig, one unexpected noise, one moment of bad luck, and the delicate dance collapses into a demolition derby. The physical dangers are constant and varied. Bites aren't playful nips. A pig's mouth is a powerful tool designed for rooting, crushing roots and defending itself. When Bartholomew, cornered by a territorial stray dog near the tannery, whips his head around his tusk, catches your forearm. It's not a deliberate attack, just instinctive flailing, but the result is the same. A deep, jagged gash tearing through your threadbare sleeve, blood welling dark and immediate. The pain is a white-hot shock. Pigs aren't predators, but their bites are dirty, prone to festering in the grime you both inhabit. You see other walkers nursing swollen, discolored hands, souvenirs of trying to retrieve a choice morsel from a possessive pig's mouth, or breaking up a sudden scrap between charges. Broken fingers, gashed palms, bruised shins from kicks delivered with surprising force from those powerful hindquarters. These are the uninsured occupational hazards. The closest thing to dentistry in Paris involves dodging tusks. Here's a mainstream historical fact: hospital records and parish archives from the period confirm the brutal toll. Accounts detail walkers admitted with mauling by swine, broken limbs occasioned by a charging boar, or severe infections stemming from bite wounds. While not as deadly as plague or rampant disease, these injuries were common enough to be a recognized peril of the trade, often leading to lost wages, permanent disability, or even death from infection in an era before antibiotics. Their work was literally a contact sport with an opponent weighing several hundred pounds. Now, a quirky tidbit. Faced with the constant threat of bites and kicks, walkers developed their own folk remedies, often involving substances readily found in the muck they traversed. A popular poultice for bites involved a revolting mixture of fresh pig dung, believed to have sympathetic healing properties, crushed garlic, a known if crude antiseptic, and cheap vinegar, all mashed together and slapped onto the wound. For bruises from kicks, a compress of muddy clay scooped from the riverbank was favored, thought to draw out the bad humors. Needless to say, the efficacy was questionable, and the smell added insult to injury. Imagine tending a nasty gash with a stinking plaster of pig waste, your only pharmacy, the gutter itself. And here's where historians still argue, were the pigs themselves the primary source of danger? Or was the human element? Angry citizens, opportunistic thieves, chaotic street traffic? The greater threat? Some scholars point to the frequency of bite and trampling injuries in records. Others argue these were recorded because they were specific to the job, while conflicts with people, fights, assaults, accidents caused by panicked pigs were often categorized under general disturbances or assaults, obscuring their link to the walkers. Was the street itself, with its carts, horses, and volatile populace, a more lethal environment than the pigs they managed? The muddy waters of the past refuse to settle. Angry citizens are a hazard all their own. Bartholomew, momentarily freed during the dog incident, plows into the cheesemonger's stall in his blind panic. Wheels of brie and pungent Roquefort tumble like bowling pins splattering onto the filthy stones. The cheesemonger, a mountain of a man with a face like thunder, doesn't go after the pig. He comes for you. His roar drowns out Bartholomew's squeals. "Salud! Look what your filthy beast did!" Spittle flies. His fist, thick as a ham hock, grabs your tunic, hauling you off balance. The threat isn't just a fine, it's a beating. You stammer apologies, trying to disentangle promising restitution you can't afford, while frantically scanning for Bartholomew, who's now rooting through the carnage he created, happily devouring spilled curds. The merchant's rage is a physical force fueled by lost livelihood and the sheer infuriating presence of the pig and its lowly keeper. You are the lightning rod for every ounce of frustration the city's porcine experiment has generated. Shopkeepers wield brooms like clubs, housewives hurl rotten vegetables, adding insult to injury, and drunken youth see a walker struggling as easy prey for taunts or opportunistic shoves into particularly foul puddles. Your uniform makes you a target. Then there's the traffic. Trying to cross the Rue Saint-Denis with Bartholomew in tow is an act of faith bordering on suicide. Carts piled high with barrels drawn by massive blinkered percherons rattle past at alarming speeds. Carriages with oblivious nobles inside clip corners. Pedestrians dart like startled minnows. Bartholomew, unnerved by the noise and movement, decides now is the perfect time to plant his feet and refuse to budge right in the central channel where the runoff flows thickest. You pull, you plead, you nudge. A carter, unable to stop his heavy wagon, bellows a curse. The horse's hot breath washes over you, its massive hooves striking sparks mere inches from Bartholomew's oblivious snout. You throw your weight against the pig, screaming, shoving with the prod, pure adrenaline overriding exhaustion. Bartholomew lurches sideways, the cart thundering past, splashing you both with a wave of foul slurry. Your heart hammers against your ribs like a trapped bird. It's not just the pigs, it's the city itself, a grinding machine of wood iron and horseflesh, utterly indifferent to the man and his grunting charge caught in its gears. A spooked horse could kill you as easily as a panicked boar. A speeding cart could turn you both into a messy statistic. The walker's world is a minefield. One misstep, one startled dog, one dropped apple core in the wrong place, and the fragile piece shatters. You navigate a landscape where teeth snap, fists clench, and hooves thunder, all while holding onto a rope attached to several hundred pounds of unpredictable appetite wrapped in bristles. The dangers aren't abstract. They're immediate, visceral, and etched onto your body in bruises, bites, and the constant low hum of fear beneath the stench and the grime. You patch your arm with a strip of filthy rag, wincing. You placate the cheesemonger with promises you'll likely break. You wipe the foul slurry from your eyes, the taste of the street thick on your lips. Bartholomew, blissfully unaware of the havoc he caused, grunts, contentedly having discovered a particularly flavorful lump of trampled Roquefort. You tighten your grip on the rope, the familiar burn, a grim comfort. The walk isn't just a job. It's a daily gauntlet run through teeth tempers and traffic where survival is measured in near misses and the depth of your next breath. The only certainty is the next peril lurking just around the next grimy corner, waiting for you and your walking liability to stumble into its path. Dot, that rope in your hand isn't just connected to Bartholomew. It's a tripwire strung across a battlefield. The simmering tensions ignited by the Great Pig Experiment don't just manifest in angry shoves or flung vegetables. They erupt into full-blown political warfare, and you, the lowly walker, are caught squarely in the crossfire. The most formidable enemy isn't a spooked pig or a splashing cart. It's the Butcher's Guild. These men aren't just meat merchants. They're a powerful, wealthy fraternity with deep political ties, crisp aprons, and a profound hatred for free-roaming garbage disposals. Why? Because Bartholomew and his kin are eating their profits. Here's the brutal economics: awful bloodbone scraps, unusable fat. The butcher's waste stream wasn't garbage. It was gold. Collected carefully, often by the butcher's own hired hands or specialized waste buyers, this noble trash was rendered down into valuable tallow for candles, soap, and lubricants, glue from bones, fertilizer from blood and entrails. It represented a significant secondary income. Now imagine watching a dozen bristly freelancers descend on the carefully sorted discard pile behind your shop, devouring weeks' worth of potential profit in minutes. The rage isn't personal against Bartholomew. It's economic fury directed at the entire porcine invasion and the system that enables it. You see the guildmasters' faces like slabs of raw beef, striding through the markets, pointing accusatory fingers at wandering pigs, collaring harassed-looking city officials. Their petitions pile higher than the Midden Mountains. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The Butchers' Guild wielded immense political clout in 17th-century Paris. They supplied the royal table and the city's elite. Their wealth funded civic projects and lined influential pockets. Their lobbying against the free-roaming pigs was relentless, well-organized, and backed by cold, hard financial arguments. They documented losses, threatened price increases for meat due to lost byproduct revenue, and framed the pigs as a direct assault on a vital regulated trade. They weren't just complaining, they were deploying economic artillery. Now, a quirky tidbit: guild butchers employed surprisingly dirty tactics. Beyond official petitions, they allegedly hired local toughs for discreet discouragement. This could mean scattering sharp tacks or broken glass near known pig congregation spots, risking human feet to paying street urchins to throw stones at specific pigs to make them seem aggressive, and justify complaints, or even accidentally bumping a particularly troublesome pig into the Seine during a riverside walk. One persistent rumor involved butchers smearing their own discarded piles with strong laxatives or irritants, leading to explosive consequences for the pigs and immense satisfaction for the watching butchers. It was a shadow war fought with gutter tactics. And here's where historians still argue: was the Butchers' Guild opposition purely economic? Or was there a deeper element of social control and perceived pollution? Some scholars argue the guild saw the uncontrolled pigs and their lowly walkers as a threat to the carefully maintained order and cleanliness around their prestigious market stalls and shops, tarnishing their professional image. Others maintain it was strictly ledger-based. The pigs were eating literal coins from their coffers. The debate hinges on whether the visceral disgust expressed in some guild records was performative outrage to bolster their economic case, or a genuine aristocratic disdain for the porcine proletariat invading their commercial domain. But the butchers aren't your only problem. Ordinary citizens already pushed to the brink by the pigs' earlier chaos find their voices amplified by the guild's powerful backing. Petitions circulate gathering signatures with angry flourishes. Crowds gather at town meetings, voices rising in a cacophony of complaint. They stink. They trip my grandmother. They root up my cabbages. They attract vermin worse than the garbage did. The walkers become the visible scapegoats. You're not just managing pigs. You're navigating a gauntlet of glares, hissed insults, porcher, and the constant low thrum of public resentment. A woman shakes her fist as Bartholomew pauses too long near her doorstep, even though he's leashed and controlled. "Take your filth elsewhere," she shrieks, as if you chose this life, as if you aren't the only thing stopping Bartholomew from actually being in her doorway. The public anger, once diffuse, now has focused the pigs, and by extension, you. Meanwhile, the city officials are sweating under their powdered wigs. Trapped between the relentless pressure of the wealthy, powerful guild and the rising roar of the populace, they scramble. Their grand, cheap solution has spawned expensive problems. They issue new regulations like frantic prayers. Stricter leash laws enforce sporadically designated pig walking hours ignored by necessity. Heavier fines for damage unenforceable against penniless walkers or their equally poor owners. They appoint more commissioners who mostly just get yelled at by everyone. You see them scuttling through the streets, clutching clipboards, looking harried, trying to count pigs while avoiding both mud and the wrath of butchers. They are bureaucrats drowning in a porcine-made flood. You feel the political pressure like a physical weight. Trying to guide Bartholomew past the butcher's row near Les Halles Market is an exercise in terror. The butchers stand before their stalls' cleavers, resting meaningfully on thick blocks, eyes like flint. They don't say a word. They don't need to. Their gaze tracks Bartholomew like he's a thief casing their shop. If he so much as sniffs towards their discard pile, even if it's technically on the street, a low growl starts not from the butchers, but from the apprentices lurking nearby, ready to defend their master's property. You pull Bartholomew closer, shortening the leash, murmuring urgent commands your prod, held ready not for the pig, but as a pathetic shield against the palpable hostility. One false move, one moment of porcine curiosity could spark a confrontation you can't win. The air crackles with unspoken threats. The conflict spills into violence, often targeting the weakest link you. A group of butchers' apprentices, emboldened by ale and guild backing, deliberately jostles you near a narrow bridge. "Watch where you're going, pigman," one snarls, shoving your shoulder. Another accidentally kicks Bartholomew's hindquarters. The boar squeals in pain and surprise, lurching sideways, dragging you off balance. Laughter erupts. You struggle to regain control, heart-pounding humiliation, burning your cheeks hotter than the rope burn on your palm. There's no official to complain to. The apprentices vanish into the crowd and the butchers look studiously away. It's intimidation, pure and simple. You are a pawn in a high-stakes game between the powerful guild demanding the pig's removal and the flailing city authorities clinging to their failing, cheap solution. Your safety, your livelihood hangs by a thread, woven from political expediency and economic interest, fraying rapidly under the strain. The rope in your hand feels less like a tool and more like the fuse on a bomb with Bartholomew, as the unwitting explosive charge and the entire stinking city waiting for the inevitable detonation. The grunts of the pigs are now drowned out by the shouts of men, and the battlefield isn't the street. It's the corridors of power fought with petitions, threats, and the occasional boot to a pig's rump with you and Bartholomew stuck miserably in the middle dot. The flurry of official parchment becomes a blizzard. It starts subtly, a new commissioner starchier than the last. Appearing near the tanneries with a scroll longer than his arm, he points. He frowns, he scribbles notes. Then the notices appear nailed with aggressive finality onto every available surface, already layered with fading proclamations about chamber pots and street sweeping. The ink is fresh, the script ornate, the sheer volume of words dizzying. You squinted one near the baker's Bartholomew, snuffling impatiently at your feet. It's not just about leashes anymore, it's about certificates. Certificates of good conduct. For the pig. "Hear ya!" a town crier bellows, struggling to be heard over Bartholomew's enthusiastic investigation of a dropped bread crust. By order of the Provost of Merchants, all swine operating within the city walls must be registered with the Office of Sanitary Compliance. Each beast must bear a numbered tag affixed securely to the ear. Owners must procure at their own expense a certificate of porcine temperament, signed by a designated commissioner after examination. Walkers must carry a validated license of control renewed quarterly failure to comply. His voice is swallowed by the city's din, but the words hang heavy. Registered, tagged, examined, licensed. The bureaucracy, sensing chaos, responds with paperwork. Mountains of it. Here's a mainstream historical fact: the escalation was real. Following intense pressure, especially from the Butchers' Guild, Parisian authorities issued a flurry of increasingly specific and restrictive ordinances throughout the 1640s. The 1645 statutes are particularly notorious, demanding registration tagging and specifying exact leash lengths no longer than 6 feet. A laughable notion when managing a panicked boar. They mandated designated waste corridors. Pigs were supposed to use ignoring the actual distribution of garbage and set curfews, forbidding pigs from certain districts entirely during market hours. It was micromanagement born of panic. Now a quirky tidbit. The porcine temperament exam quickly devolved into farce. Commissioners, often minor clerks with zero animal knowledge, would approach a pig usually held tightly by its terrified owner or walker, prod it vaguely with a stick, observe if it squealed or tried to bite, and then stamp a certificate for a fee. Clever owners learned to bring placid, well-fed sows for inspection, while their actual troublesome boars remained hidden. Walkers joked bitterly that the only temperament being certified was the commissioner's willingness to take a bribe. The tag's cheap tin affairs easily lost in a vigorous wallow or accidentally torn off by a helpful thief. The whole system reeked of performative futility. And here's where historians still argue: were these regulations a genuine, if clumsy, attempt to impose order, or were they deliberately designed to be so burdensome and expensive that they would effectively eliminate the pigs by making ownership and control economically impossible? Some scholars see the escalating fees, registration, tagging, licensing, examination, particularly targeting poorer owners, as a covert removal strategy, appeasing the guilds without an outright ban. Others argue the authorities were genuinely trying to salvage their failing system through regulation blinded by bureaucratic optimism to its impracticality and the rampant corruption undermining it. Was it malice or incompetence? The archival dust hasn't settled. You feel the weight of it immediately. Bartholomew's owner, a widowed seamstress already struggling, stares at the notice nailed near her door like it's a death warrant. The registration fee, 2 sous. The temperament exam, another sou. The tin tag, a half sou. The quarterly walker's license renewal fee, 5 sous. It's a fortune for her. For you, the license fee is nearly a day's wages. How? She whispers, her face pale. You have no answer. The system isn't designed for reality. It's designed for ledgers and the illusion of control. You trudge to the newly established and perpetually crowded Office of Sanitary Compliance, housed in a damp room near the Châtelet prison. The air inside is thick with the smell of cheap ink, unwashed petitioners, and despair. The clerk behind the high counter peers down his nose, demanding proof of Bartholomew's registration, which you don't have because his owner can't afford it, before he'll even consider your license application. It's a circular maze designed by Kafka's grimy ancestor. The rules themselves are impossible. That 6-foot leash Bartholomew extends nearly 5 feet from snout to tail. Giving him 6 feet of freedom is like giving a hurricane a handkerchief to contain itself. Trying to keep him only in the designated waste corridor, a single perpetually clogged alley behind the grain market, means starving him as the rest of the city's garbage lies tantalizingly out of bounds. The curfews. They forbid pigs near the main markets precisely when the most waste is generated. After closing, you're supposed to magically make Bartholomew nocturnal. The commissioners, when you rarely see them enforcing anything beyond collecting fines, seem bewildered by the actual mechanics of pig walking. Just keep it away from the good areas, one snaps, waving vaguely towards the wealthy quarter, utterly oblivious to how Bartholomew's world revolves entirely around smell. And the next meal, not civic zoning maps. The absurdity chafes worse than the rope. You see a fellow walker, Pierre, trying to maneuver his 2 sows down the official waste corridor. It's barely wide enough for a handcart, let alone two large pigs and a man. One sow decides the rotting grain spill just outside the corridor is far more appealing. Pierre pulls, the sow resists, tangling the two short leashes. The other sow, panicked by the commotion, bolts into the corridor, crashing into stacked barrels. A commissioner materializes, seemingly conjured by the sound of breaking wood, clipboard ready. Violation, obstruction, failure of control. Fine 3 sous. Pierre's shoulders slump, the fine swallowing half a day's labor. The pigs, oblivious, finally find the garbage pile within the corridor and begin eating. The commissioner nods, satisfied his corridor is being used, ignoring the wreckage and the economic ruin he just inflicted. Order of a sort is maintained, on paper. The regulations multiply like rats. New decrees specify the type of collar leather, only no rope loops, mandate twice daily sanitary inspections of pig pens, which are often just muddy corners of shared courtyards, and even propose distinctive colored ribbons for licensed walkers. A notion quickly abandoned when walkers pointed out thieves would just target the licensed ones. Each rule adds friction cost and a fresh opportunity for a fine. The walkers gather in grimy hovels after dark, not to socialize, but to decipher the latest bureaucratic assault. Can they fine you for a pig sighing too loud near a magistrate's house now? Someone mutters, only half joking. The city's great porcine solution is drowning in a flood of ink, red tape, and impossible demands. The rope feels heavier, the path narrower, the air thicker with the stench of futility. Bartholomew grunts, nudging your leg. He needs to move to eat. The rules say you can't go there, not now. You look at the official notice, then at the pig, then at the overflowing gutter just outside the designated zone. The gulf between the clean lines of the decree and the messy, hungry reality of the street has never felt wider or more absurd. You take a breath, tighten your grip, and step into the breach. Another tiny rebellion against the paper avalanche, knowing the commissioner's clipboard is never far behind. The ink dries on the latest decree, thick with impossible demands and punitive fees, but out on the streets, reality laughs in its face. The grand regulatory machine designed to churn out order sputters, coughs, and grinds to a halt under the sheer sticky weight of 17th-century Paris. You see it in the sagging shoulders of the newly appointed commissioner of porcine compliance, Monsieur Dubois. He stands near the pont au change, clutching his clipboard like a shield. His fine silk breeches already spattered with mud from a puddle an unsupervised piglet wallowed in moments ago. His powdered wig sits slightly askew, a visual metaphor for the entire enterprise. He scans the teeming riverbank, a chaotic panorama of washerwomen beating linens, barges unloading fishermen mending nets, and pigs, dozens of them, snuffling, rooting, grunting, some leashed, many not, some tagged, most not. His gaze darts from one bristly offender to the next, his pen hovering uselessly. Where does he even begin? The task is Sisyphean. He is one man armed with parchment against a porcine tide. Here's a mainstream historical fact: enforcement was chronically underfunded and undermanned. Paris might appoint a dozen commissioners for a city teeming with thousands of pigs and hundreds of walkers. These officials lacked the resources, the manpower, and often the sheer physical courage to impose order on the chaotic streets. They were expected to inspect pens, check tags, verify licenses, measure leash lengths, observe curfews, and adjudicate damage complaints, all while navigating the same hazardous, filthy labyrinth as everyone else. It was a logistical impossibility. Records show commissioners frequently complaining of being ignored, threatened, or simply unable to locate specific pigs or owners in the Warren-like city. Now a quirky tidbit. Faced with impossible quotas and public ridicule, some commissioners resorted to creative accounting. They'd stand on a relatively clean bridge for an hour, count the pigs they saw from a distance, often wildly inaccurate note. A few token violations, a loose piglet, a walker without an obvious license, collect a few easy fines from known compliant owners who could actually pay and call it a day's work. Their reports would boast of numerous inspections and diligent enforcement, while the actual chaos continued unabated meters away. It was bureaucracy as performance art, a pantomime of control for the benefit of officials higher up the chain who never ventured into the muck. One satirical pamphlet of the era depicted a commissioner painting fake tags on pigs from afar using a long stick and a pot of cheap paint. And here's where historians still argue, was the enforcement failure primarily due to lack of resources, or was it a symptom of deeper institutional corruption and apathy? Some scholars point to the meager salaries offered to commissioners, arguing it attracted incompetent or easily bribed individuals. Others cite the complex web of patronage. Commissioners might hesitate to fine a pig owned by a relative of a powerful guildsman or city official. Still, others argue the entire system was designed to appear active while tacitly accepting its own futility, a way for authorities to say "we tried" when pressured by the butchers or the public. Was it ineptitude, corruption, or cynical theater? The historical jury remains hung much like a commissioner's wig caught on a low-hanging sign. You witness the farce daily. Commissioner Dubois spots Bartholomew untagged naturally, rooting enthusiastically near a pile of discarded oyster shells just outside the designated waste corridor. He puffs out his chest, adjusts his wig, and strides over clipboard held aloft like a weapon. "You there, Walker?" he barks, attempting authority. "Where is this beast's registration tag? Why is it outside the designated corridor? Produce your license immediately." You fumble in your grimy pouch, finally pulling out the crumpled, sweat-stained license you paid a week's wages for. Dubois scrutinizes it, nose wrinkled at the smell, holding it gingerly between thumb and forefinger. Valid, for now. He points an accusing finger at Bartholomew. But the tag and the corridor violation? Fine 5 sous. 5 sous, a brutal chunk of your meager pay. You gesture helplessly at Bartholomew's owner, the seamstress invisible in her tiny room miles away, unable to afford the registration. You point to the overflowing oyster shells clearly dumped illegally right on the corridor boundary. "Monsieur Commissioner, the shells. They weren't here yesterday. The corridor starts there." You point vaguely to a spot 3 feet away, indistinguishable from the rest of the filthy street. Dubois flushes. The corridor boundaries, marked only on poorly drawn maps in his office, are invisible on the ground. The oyster shells are underscore a violation. By the shell dumper, not necessarily you. He hesitates, caught between the letter of his unenforceable law and the messy reality before him. His eyes dart around. A wealthy merchant's carriage is trying to pass the driver, shouting at a different unleashed pig blocking the way. A fishwife starts yelling at Dubois about that underscore pig not yours. The pressure mounts. He needs a win, but this is taking too long. 3 sous, he snaps, reducing the fine arbitrarily. "And get it tagged. Next time it's confiscation." He scribbles hastily on his clipboard, doesn't give you a receipt, and hurries off towards the louder commotion already out of his depth. The encounter leaves you poorer shaken and no closer to compliance. The system isn't just failing, it's crumbling under its own absurd weight. Walkers start vanishing. Not physically necessarily, but from the job. Pierre fined into oblivion last week simply didn't show up yesterday. Rumor has it he took a riskier job cleaning out cesspits. Less public scorn, marginally better pay. Young Jacques, bitten badly by a spooked guilt, lies feverish in his cramped room. No wages coming and no hope of paying a doctor. The seamstress owner, unable to afford the registration fees and your wages, tearfully tells you she might have to sell Bartholomew early for less than he's worth, just to be rid of the burden. The human infrastructure of pig control is collapsing. Fewer walkers mean more unattended pigs, more chaos, more complaints, which prompts more unenforceable regulations from desperate officials. It's a death spiral. Ownership plummets. The initial promise of free waste disposal and eventual pork is buried under fees, fines, and the sheer hassle. Poorer citizens, the backbone of the pig army, sell their animals to butchers for pennies or simply abandon them. You see the evidence: gaunt, skittish pigs with no collars or tags roaming furtively in packs, becoming truly feral. They're thinner, more desperate, more likely to cause trouble. They raid gardens at night, knock over barrels, scatter chickens. They are the ghosts of the failed policy haunting the alleys. Commissioner Dubois, a week later, looks harried and defeated. He stands near the same spot, but his clipboard hangs limply at his side. He watches a trio of clearly feral pigs scatter a flock of geese near the river, sending feathers flying and women shrieking. He makes no move to intervene. He just sighs a long, weary exhalation that seems to deflate him. He turns and walks slowly away back towards the Châtelet. His shoulders slumped. The paper shield has shattered. The regulations lie scattered like discarded oyster shells trodden into the muck. The porcine solution born of desperation nurtured by chaos and suffocated by bureaucracy is gasping its last ragged breaths. The mountains of garbage are creeping back, reclaiming territory the pigs once cleared. The stench intensifies. The complaints reach a fever pitch. The Butchers' Guild sharpens its knives, metaphorical and real. The city holds its breath, waiting for the inevitable final crackdown. The rope feels slack in your hand. Bartholomew senses the shift, the unraveling. He lifts his snout, sniffing the air thick with decay and impending doom. The experiment is over. The reckoning swift and porcine free is coming, Dot? You smell the panic before you see it. It cuts through the usual city stench. Sharper, sourer, laced with fear and dust kicked up by heavy boots. It's not just pig musk anymore, it's the metallic tang of authority flexing its muscles. Then you hear it, the rhythmic thud of marching feet on cobbles, the sharp clatter of pike butts striking stone. And beneath it, a rising chorus of frantic, high-pitched squealing, unlike anything Bartholomew's usual contented grunts. The crackdown isn't whispered about in taverns. It crashes through the streets like a battering ram. Organized patrols appear, not the lone bewildered commissioner, but squads of the Get, the city watch, augmented by burly laborers hired for the day, armed with nets, ropes, and grim determination. Their orders are clear, brutal, and final: confiscate. Remove, clear the streets. The shift is terrifyingly swift. One morning, the familiar chaotic dance of pigs and walkers persists, however strained. By afternoon, the patrols are moving block by block, a grim tide of enforced order. You see them near the grain market? 4 watchmen in stained tabards, flanked by 6 hired muscle in rough tunics, forming a ragged cordon across an alley mouth. Inside, chaos reigns. 2 walkers' faces white with terror try desperately to gather their panicked charges. 3 sows and a boar away from the advancing net wielders. The pigs sense the threat, squealing, darting, crashing into stacked sacks of oats. One hired man lunges with a net, misses, tangles it in a market stall's awning. Another throws a rope lasso. It snags a sow's hind leg. She screams a sound of pure animal terror, thrashing wildly, dragging the man off his feet into the muck. The watchmen shout orders, shoving bystanders back. It's not capture, it's a skirmish. The air crackles with violence and porcine panic. This is the end, not with a whimper, but with a cacophony of squeals and shouted commands. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The mass confiscations of the late 1640s, particularly intensifying after 1645, are well documented. Faced with the undeniable failure of regulation and escalating public guild pressure, authorities resorted to brute force. Records detail payments to laborers for swine removal costs for carts to transport confiscated pigs, and the sale of seized animals at auction, often to the very butchers who lobbied for their removal. It was a massive, costly, and chaotic logistical operation. A final admission that the natural solution had become an unnatural disaster. Now a quirky tidbit. The sudden influx of hundreds of panicked, confiscated pigs created an immediate problem: where to put them. The solution was the infamous pig prison, hastily repurposed yards near the Châtelet fortress and other city gates. These temporary holding pens became scenes of surreal squalor. Pigs, terrified and crammed together, fought trampled, weaker animals and escaped with surprising ingenuity, digging under flimsy fences or battering weak spots in the walls. Guards were posted not to keep thieves out, but to keep the pigs in. Imagine the din, a concentrated chorus of porcine distress echoing from the city's own makeshift jails, a final ironic indignity. Feeding them was an afterthought. Many arrived already starving from the disrupted foraging and left thinner bound for the butcher's block. And here's where historians still argue: were the confiscations truly indiscriminate, or did authorities selectively target the poor? Some scholars point to records showing fines were still levied against wealthier owners who could afford tags and licenses, suggesting an attempt at fairness. Others argue the crackdown disproportionately impacted the small owners. Widows, laborers, artisans who couldn't pay the fees or hide their pigs effectively, while those with connections or resources shielded their animals. Was it a purge of the porcine proletariat clearing the streets for the elite? The evidence, like the fate of the pigs themselves, is messy and contested. You witness the human wreckage. Near Madame Leclerc's, the seamstress who owns Bartholomew stands in her doorway, tears cutting clean tracks through the grime on her cheeks. A patrol has just passed. They took Madame Renard's old sow Blanche, her only real asset, her walking larder. Blanche had a tag technically, but it was loose, and the patrol leader declared it insufficiently secured. Madame Renard argued, pleaded, offered her meager savings. 2 sous. They shoved her aside. Blanche screamed a sound of pure betrayal as they dragged her away. The seamstress clutches Bartholomew's rope so tightly, her knuckles are white, her eyes darting up and down the street, expecting the patrol any moment. Her registration papers are inside, but the tag isn't affixed yet. She couldn't afford the blacksmith's fee to pierce his ear. The fear is paralyzing. Bartholomew, sensing her distress, presses his broad head against her leg, a gesture of clumsy comfort that only deepens the tragedy. For the poor, the pigs weren't just sanitation. They were savings accounts on trotters now being foreclosed by the city. Resistance is fragmented, desperate, and futile. You hear about a group of enraged owners in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine who tried to block a patrol cart loaded with squealing pigs, pelting the guards with rotten vegetables and stones. The Get simply drew swords, dispersed them with a few cracked skulls and arrests, and drove on. Another walker, driven mad by the seizure of his only charge, reportedly let loose a pack of feral dogs near a holding pen, causing a stampede that allowed a few pigs to escape before the dogs were beaten off. It was a tiny Pyrrhic victory. Mostly resistance is silent, hiding pigs in cellars, attics, even under beds, a risky, smelly endeavor, or trying to spirit them out of the city gates, disguised as sacks of grain or bundled rags. But the net tightens daily. Patrols grow more numerous, more aggressive. Bribes that might have worked last week are refused. The orders from above are too strict. The cityscape changes before your eyes. Streets once punctuated by grunting and the sight of rooting pigs feel emptier, quieter, yet somehow more tense. The mountains of garbage temporarily held at bay begin their inevitable resurgence. Flies rediscover neglected piles. Rats grow bolder. The stench of decay, unmasked by the absence of porcine consumption, creeps back with a vengeance. Butchers smirk openly now, directing their waste carts towards the tanneries and soap boilers with renewed purpose. Wealthy merchants air out their rugs, enjoying the relative peace, oblivious to the suffering in the cramped courtyards behind their grand houses. Commissioner Dubois marches past with a patrol, his back straighter, his wig pristine. He points imperiously towards a lone, bewildered-looking piglet that's bolted from a collapsing hiding spot. "Seize it!" He barks, the very picture of restored authority. The illusion of control is back-bought with brute force and broken livelihoods. You stand with Bartholomew in the seamstress's tiny, shadowed courtyard. The fear is a physical thing, thick in the air. She strokes the boar's bristly head, whispering apologies he can't understand. She can't afford the tag. She can barely afford you anymore. The patrols are coming closer. The writing isn't just on the wall. It's nailed to every corner, shouted by marching feet. The great porcine experiment isn't ending. It's being violently euthanized, street by street, squeal by terrified squeal. The rope in your hand feels like the last thread tethering Bartholomew to this precarious existence. You look at his small, intelligent eye, his snout still twitching hopefully for a stray scrap. He doesn't know the world is closing in. He only knows the next meal, the next patch of mud. The city's desperate gamble is over. The bill has come due, and it's being paid in pigs and tears and in the slow, suffocating return of the filth they were supposed to conquer. The patrol's marching drums echo a death knell, growing louder, drawing nearer. The seamstress flinches at the sound. Bartholomew grunts, oblivious. You tighten your grip, knowing it won't be enough. The net is coming. The patrol's boots stop outside the seamstress's crooked door. Not a request. A demand hammered with a gauntleted fist. Open in the name of the provost swine inspection? The seamstress flinches like the blow landed on her skin. Bartholomew, sensing the vibration through the floorboards, lifts his snout from the meager slops bucket, a low, uncertain rumble building in his chest. You stand frozen, the rope slack in your suddenly numb hand. This isn't a random patrol, it's a targeted eviction. Someone talked. A neighbor tired of the smell, an apprentice seeking favor, the cheesemonger still furious about his lost Roquefort. The door creaks open under the official shove. Commissioner Dubois fills the frame, flanked by 2 Get watchmen and a hired brute holding a coiled net. Dubois' eyes sweep the tiny, pungent yard, bypassing the trembling seamstress, entirely landing on Bartholomew. His gaze is cold, administrative. No wig today, just a stained tricorn hat pulled low. Untagged, he states flatly, ticking a box on his clipboard. Unregistered, as per the public records. Confiscation order 247 subsection B. He nods to the netman. Seize it. The seamstress finds her voice a raw scrape. Please, monsieur, we have the papers. The tag, the blacksmith. Next week he is registered. See here. She thrusts crumpled documents towards Dubois. He glances at them, unimpressed. Papers are not the tag. The tag must be affixed. Regulation 12, paragraph 4. Seize it. The netman steps forward, net unfurling. Bartholomew backs up, pressing his haunches against the damp stone wall, the rumble deepening into a warning growl. His small eyes dart between the net. The stranger's you. He understands threat. Easy, boy. You murmur, your voice thick. Stepping slightly in front of him, the rope tightening instinctively. It's a futile gesture. The Get watchmen move in pikes held horizontally, not to stab, but to herd to block. Step aside, Walker, one grunts, his breath smelling of cheap wine and onions. Or you'll join it in the cart. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Confiscation wasn't gentle. Procedures demanded the animal be seized and removed, but the human reality was often brutal chaos. Pigs cornered and terrified fought fiercely. Records mention injuries to watchmen and laborers during these operations. Bites, tramplings, men knocked into walls or gutters. The priority was removal, not welfare. The holding pens, pig prisons, were notorious for injuries and deaths among the densely packed stressed animals awaiting sale or slaughter. Now, a quirky tidbit. Some desperate owners attempted last-minute baptisms. Knowing authorities sometimes hesitated briefly around church property, a few tried to lead their pigs into the local parish church during Mass, hoping the sacred ground would offer sanctuary from the secular net. It rarely worked. Priests appalled by the smell and disruption usually ordered both pig and owner ejected immediately, often straight into the waiting arms of the patrol. Imagine the scene: a terrified sow squealing down the nave, a distraught owner pleading, a furious priest brandishing a censer like a weapon, and the implacable watchman waiting at the door. Divine intervention was in short supply for pigs. And here's where historians still argue, what happened to all those confiscated pigs? Were they primarily sold at public auction, benefiting city coffers and the waiting butchers, or were large numbers simply slaughtered en masse and dumped outside the walls to avoid the cost and chaos of holding them? Some auction records exist, but scholars suspect a significant portion, especially the sick, injured, or simply unmanageable animals, met a swift, unrecorded end in makeshift abattoirs or were disposed of in plague pits or remote quarries. Was the crackdown as much about sanitation as it was about appeasing the butchers and restoring order? The fate of the foot soldiers of the porcine experiment remains partially shrouded in the murk of expediency. The net flies. Bartholomew sees it coming, a dark spreading shadow. He ducks, but not fast enough. The coarse hemp tangles around his shoulders, his head. He screams, not a grunt, not a squeal, but a piercing, panicked shriek of pure animal terror that claws at your ears and your gut. He rears, twisting violently, his powerful body slamming against the stone wall, against the watchman's pike shafts. The netman yells, pulling hard, trying to cinch it. Bartholomew thrashes his hooves, skidding on the muddy stones. One flailing leg catches the seamstress's shin. She cries out, falling to her knees, her pleas turning to sobs. "Hold him!" Dubois shouts, backing away, clipboard held up like a shield. "Secure the beast!" The second watchman drops his pike and lunges, grabbing Bartholomew's hind leg. The hired brute wraps his arms around the boar's thrashing neck from behind a grotesque embrace. Bartholomew's screams turn guttural, choked. He bites blindly, teeth snapping on air on net on the brute's leather jerkin. Spittle flies mingling with the mud churned up by his struggles. The stink of fear piss fills the tiny yard, sharp and acrid. You stand, rooted rope still in hand, utterly useless. Your job was control. Your purpose was preventing this terror, this violence, this violation of the fragile, muddy peace you'd carved out. You want to shout to shove the watchman away, to cut the net. But the pike points gleam dully. Dubois' cold gaze flicks to you. Interfere, Walker, and you'll answer before the magistrate. The threat is real. Your fists clench, nails biting into your palms, matching the burn of the rope you can no longer use. You are a spectator to the dismantling of your world. It takes 3 agonizing minutes. 3 minutes of Bartholomew's terrified screams, of the men's grunts and curses, of the seamstress's broken weeping on the ground. They wrestle him down. They tie his thrashing legs with more rope, ignoring his desperate rolling eyes. They loop a thick cord around his snout, forcing his jaws shut, muffling the screams into desperate, snuffling whimpers. He lies on his side flanks, heaving mud plastered to his hide net, cutting into his skin, utterly subdued by fear and force. The brute wipes sweat and spittle from his face with a filthy sleeve. "Right bastard, this one," he pants. 2 poles are slid under the trussed bore. The watchmen take the ends. With a grunt of effort, they heave Bartholomew off the ground. He hangs suspended, a monstrous, bristly parcel, only his eyes showing white-rimmed terror as he's carried swaying out of the yard. The seamstress scrambles after them on hands and knees, reaching out a trembling hand towards Bartholomew's dangling snout. "My pig, my Bartholomew." "Please!" A watchman shoves her back roughly with his boot. She collapses in the mud, her sobs echoing the pig's muffled whimpers fading down the alley. Dubois steps over her, avoiding the mud. He scribbles something on his clipboard, tears off a slip, and tosses it dismissively towards her crumpled form. It lands face down in the muck. "Confiscation receipt. You may petition for compensation at the Châtelet." He doesn't look at her, doesn't look at you. His job here is done. He follows the grunting procession, carrying Bartholomew away. Silence crashes down heavy and suffocating. The only sounds are the seamstress's ragged sobs and the frantic dripping of water from a cracked gutter. The yard feels cavernously empty without Bartholomew's bulk. His familiar earthy smell overwhelmed by the stench of fear and violence. The rope hangs limp from your hand, its other end severed, useless. You stare at the muddy scrap of paper, the receipt for a life, for a livelihood, for a desperate solution turned into a casualty. The seamstress lifts her head, her eyes meeting yours, empty of everything but a vast, stunned despair. Your charge is gone, your purpose gone. The city's great grunting gamble ends here, not with a policy reversal, but with a net ropes and the fading, terrified whimpers of a boar named Bartholomew, carried away to an uncertain, likely brutal end. The rope slips from your fingers, landing with a soft thud in the mud where he last stood. Your hands are empty. Silence. It's the first thing you notice. Not true silence. The city still groans and clatters. But the absence of that constant low-frequency backdrop, the grunts, the wet snuffling, the rhythmic chomp, chomp, chomp of 1,000 jaws processing the city's waste. The air feels different, too. Thinner somehow, yet heavier with the unmasked reek of garbage slowly baking in the late spring sun. You walk familiar streets, your hands strangely light without the rope, the familiar ache in your shoulders replaced by a hollow numbness. You pass the spot where Bartholomew once demolished a pile of cabbage leaves near the baker's. It's still there, untouched, already attracting a fresh cloud of flies. The cheesemonger sweeps his pristine doorstep, a faint smirk playing on his lips. No Roquefort carnage today. The victory of the butchers and the broom-wielding bourgeoisie is palpable, etched in cleaner cobbles and smug expressions. But look closer. See the seamstress? She sits listlessly on her doorstep, her hands idle in her lap, no bolts of cloth to mend. Her eyes are red-rimmed, staring at nothing. Bartholomew wasn't just a pig. He was her winter larder, her security, her small investment in a precarious future. Confiscated without compensation. The city's receipt lies trampled in the mud of her yard, worthless parchment. You see other small owners, the cobbler staring at his empty back pen, the widow whose 2 piglets were her only insurance against starvation, now gone. Their faces are etched with a quiet devastation that no official proclamation can wipe away. The human cost of the purge isn't tallied in ledgers, it's measured in empty bellies and vacant stares. The crackdown didn't just remove pigs, it erased tiny lifelines for the poorest. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The sudden removal of thousands of pigs created immediate economic ripples. Butchers briefly enjoyed a glut of cheap meat from confiscated and auctioned animals, driving prices down. Tallow and soap boilers also benefited from the influx of raw materials. However, this windfall was short-lived. More significantly, the loss of this small-scale investment livestock plunged many already marginal families deeper into destitution, increasing reliance on charity or desperate measures. Parish poor relief records from this period show a noticeable, if difficult to precisely quantify, uptick in requests. Now, a quirky tidbit. The abrupt disappearance of pigs left a peculiar void in the city's soundscape and even its pest control. Rats, briefly suppressed by the rooting pigs disturbing their nests and competing for food, experienced a population boom almost immediately. Contemporary diarists noted the sudden boldness of rodents, running in daylight packs across squares once patrolled by swine. Some resourceful tavern owners near the river even experimented with leasing terriers from rat catchers to patrol their cellars. A small, yapping echo of the porcine vacuum. The solution had ironically suppressed one problem only to slightly amplify another. And here's where historians still argue, did the removal of the pigs actually improve public health or sanitation in the short term? Or was it purely a restoration of visual and social order? Some scholars point to a perceived cleanliness, fewer animals underfoot, less visible chaos, arguing this alone boosted morale and reduced disease-spreading stress. Others countered that the garbage, now entirely unchecked by porcine appetites, piled higher and faster than before, likely increasing fly populations and contamination risks. Without improved waste removal systems which didn't materialize, the health benefits were likely negligible or even negative. Was it hygiene or aesthetics that truly drove the final purge? The evidence remains stubbornly murky. You feel the shift viscerally. Your calloused hands shaped by the rope and prod feel useless. The muscles built hauling against Bartholomew's stubbornness now have no purpose. You drift through the streets a ghost in your own life. The familiar landmarks feel alien without the context of your daily battle. The Chandler's wall Bartholomew liked to scratch against, just a wall now. The stinking runoff ditch he avoided, just a ditch. Your specialized knowledge, the snout alley detour. The timing of the fishmonger's awful dump. Bartholomew's inexplicable fear of flapping laundry is suddenly obsolete, worthless. You pass other walkers. You recognize Pierre sitting glumly on a mounting block, picking at a callus. Marthe is arguing with a fishwife over the price of a scrawny herring, her willow switch absent. There are no nods of weary solidarity now, just shared emptiness. The profession that defined you, that branded you, that paid you pennies to wade through filth, has vanished overnight. You are unemployed, unskilled in anything else, and permanently marked by the stench of a vanished trade. The city authorities, meanwhile, perform their victory lap. Proclamations trumpet the restoration of order and decency to the streets. Commissioner Dubois is seen taking leisurely strolls, his uniform clean, pointing out now pig-free zones to minor officials who scribble notes. They pat themselves on the back for solving the problem, ignoring the burgeoning garbage piles accumulating precisely because the pigs are gone. The Butchers' Guild hosts a lavish dinner, the air thick with the aroma of roast pork, some of it likely very recently confiscated. They toast the cleanliness of commerce. The wealthy breathe easier metaphorically and literally, enjoying cleaner hems on their promenades. But for you, the silence is deafening. You stand near the river where Bartholomew once snuffled cautiously at the waterweed. The water flows brown and indifferent. A rat scuttles boldly along the bank, undisturbed. The emptiness inside you echoes the emptiness on the streets, where bristly backs and twitching snouts once moved. The city discarded its unconventional solution and discarded you along with it. The rope is gone. The prod is splintered firewood. Your voice, trained to issue grunts and whistles understood only by pigs, has nothing to say in the human world. You are a relic of a brief, bizarre, and failed experiment. The struggle, the stink, the stigma, it's over. All that remains is the hollow aftermath, the slow creep of unprocessed filth, and the unsettling quiet where the grunting symphony used to play. You are no longer a pig walker, you are simply adrift. The only path left leads towards the crowded, desperate lines forming outside the parish poorhouse. Another anonymous soul swallowed by the city's relentless hunger. This time for order, bought at the price of the poor and their peculiar productive beasts. The rope is gone, but its absence is the heaviest burden yet. Dot. The silence settles over Paris like a layer of fine, grimy dust. No grunts echo down the alleyways. No wet snuffling disturbs the piles of refuse already reclaiming their territories near markets and taverns. The pigs are gone, swept away in a tide of nets and official decrees. But their absence doesn't bring the clean, orderly streets the authorities promised. Instead, you witness a swift, grim regression. The garbage mountains grow unchecked, taller, denser, more putrid than before. Without thousands of voracious snouts processing scraps daily, the waste accumulates with alarming speed. Kitchen slops congeal in gutters, fish guts fester under the sun, and discarded vegetables rot into slimy sludge. Flies descend in thick, buzzing clouds, their drone replacing the porcine soundtrack. And the rats? Oh, the rats! Bold and numerous, they reclaim the night. You see them at dusk, shadows flitting across cobbles and packs spilling from cellar gratings, scaling walls, feasting openly on the unguarded bounty. Their squeaks and scuttles fill the void left by the pigs, a skittering testament to nature's abhorrence of a vacuum. The city traded bristly chaos for buzzing, scurrying decay. The victory of the clean-swept doorstep feels hollow, a thin veneer over a festering problem. The human wreckage is less visible but more profound. You see Pierre near the river, shoulders slumped, joining the queue outside the parish poorhouse. A line longer now filled with hollow-eyed former pig owners and walkers. The seamstress stares blankly at her, mending her fingers idle. The small security Bartholomew represented ripped away without compensation. Young Jacques, his bite wound healed, but his spirit broken, begs near the cathedral, his once useful prod now a crutch. The specialized skills honed over years, reading a pig's ear flick, anticipating a lunge, navigating the snout alley detour, are worthless relics. The stigma lingers too. You catch a whiff of ammonia on a discarded rag and flinch, the phantom scent of your old life, triggering a wave of uselessness. The city discarded its unconventional sanitation force and discarded the people who managed them, leaving only empty hands and emptier bellies where purpose once resided. The grand solution didn't just fail, it left scars on the landscape and the souls of its most desperate participants. Here's a mainstream historical fact: Paris's waste crisis was far from solved. The pig experiment was merely one bizarre chapter in a centuries-long struggle. Within decades, the city faced the infamous Great Stink of the 18th century, where the putrid Seine and overflowing cemeteries became unbearable, eventually forcing more systematic, if still flawed, approaches like covered sewers and organized waste collection. The pig episode stands as a stark reminder of the desperate, often ill-conceived measures cities resort to before embracing costly infrastructure. It highlighted a fundamental truth. Urban waste is a relentless, growing beast, and cheap, natural solutions often come with hidden, chaotic costs. Now a quirky tidbit. The era left bizarre linguistic footprints. The phrase mener une vie de porcher, to live a pig walker's life, entered Parisian slang, meaning a life of extreme hardship, squalor, and social ostracization. Children developed a chasing game called Attrape le cochon, catch the pig, where one player, the walker, tried to corral the others, the pigs, using improvised ropes and shouts often dissolving into chaotic giggling pile-ups mimicking the street battles of old. More macabrely, butchers reportedly developed a specific cut nicknamed le biftec du commissaire, the commissioner's steak-tough, cheap meat, supposedly favored by the low-level officials who enforced the crackdown, a dark culinary joke on the men who profited from the purge. These fragments, a phrase, a game, a cut of meat, are the ghostly echoes of the grunting past woven into the city's subconscious. And here's where historians still argue: was the 17th-century Parisian pig experiment a unique historical folly, or is it part of a recurring pattern of cities attempting and failing to outsource their waste management to animals? Some scholars point to it as a singularly ill-advised large-scale urban disaster, born of specific pressures and poor governance. Others see parallels: medieval European towns using geese for grass control with messy results, Victorian London employing pigs in dairies and sewers causing disease outbreaks, or even modern cities struggling with feral cat colonies for rodent control with mixed success. The debate hinges on whether Paris's experience was an outlier or a cautionary example of humanity's persistent, often misguided hope that nature's cleaners can handle the sheer volume and complexity of human-generated filth without unintended consequences. Is the dream of a self-cleaning city via fauna a recurring delusion? The jury, much like a distracted commissioner, is still out. Reflecting on it now, the sheer absurdity takes your breath away. Imagine the meeting-powdered wigs nodding sagely as someone proposed unleashing thousands of pigs into one of Europe's densest cities as a cost-saving measure. The tragicomedy unfolds with grim predictability, initial hope escalating chaos, The birth of a maligned profession, political battles, bureaucratic suffocation, and finally violent removal. It was a solution that created more problems than it solved, punishing the poor while failing the rich. The pigs weren't villains. They were hungry creatures caught in a human-made disaster, tools used and discarded. The walkers weren't lazy or inept. They were frontline soldiers in a war against filth and disorder, armed only with rope and desperation, paid in scorn and calluses. The legacy isn't one of innovation, but of hubris, and the harsh reality that complex urban problems rarely yield to simple living solutions. Paris tried to hire nature's janitors, forgetting that nature is messy, unpredictable, and doesn't follow decrees. The mountains of garbage returned, the rats celebrated, the poor suffered, and the city learned slowly and painfully that there are no shortcuts through the muck. The silence after the squeals wasn't peace. It was the sound of a problem deferred, waiting for the next desperate, unlikely, and probably doomed idea to emerge from the ever-piling waste of human ingenuity. The pigs were gone, but the dirt remained a timeless challenge whispered on the wind that still carried the faint phantom scent of ammonia and despair. Dot. The grime of centuries settles softly now, not as a suffocating blanket, but as a distant murmur, a story told and almost finished. Breathe deep, letting the tension in your shoulders melt away, the imagined rope burn fading from your palms. Paris, with its frantic energy and impossible problems, recedes like a tide pulling back from the shore. The desperate officials, the grumbling pigs, the weary walkers, they dissolve into the gentle haze of history, their struggles now just ripples in a vast, quiet sea of time. Feel the weight lifting not just from your body, but from your mind. The chaotic streets blur and soften, the shouts fading to whispers, the clatter of carts becoming the rhythmic sigh of distant waves. Those mountains of refuse. They crumble into sand washed clean by the patient turning of years. The sharp tang of the city air softens, replaced by the cool, clean scent of night-blooming jasmine, drifting through an open window, or perhaps the subtle earthiness of rain-kissed soil far away. It's easy from this quiet distance to smile at the absurdity. The earnest men in wigs, the pigs turned civil servants, the impossible dream of a city cleaned by appetite alone. History is full of such stumbles, grand experiments launched with hope and ending in unintended chaos. Yet there's a strange comfort in it too. Humanity tries. We grasp for solutions, sometimes foolishly, always driven by the need to impose order on our messy world. The failures, like the successes, become threads in the immense, intricate tapestry of how we live together. So let the images soften further. See not the muck and the struggle, but the sheer, enduring effort of it all. The walker's weary determination, the pig's simple hunger, the city's relentless pulse. All part of the endless, fascinating dance of survival and adaptation. The specifics blur, leaving only a gentle sense of connection to those who walked different streets under different stars, facing their own versions of the eternal, messy challenge of existence. The story settles within you now, no longer demanding attention, simply resting like a smooth stone warmed by the sun. Let your breathing slow, matching the gentle cadence of the fan's hum, a soft lullaby against the silence. The past has shared its peculiar tale, offered its quiet lesson in imperfection, and now it recedes, leaving you wrapped in the profound, velvety peace of the present moment. Drift now? Drift on the calm surface of this deep, dark sea, where even the echoes of squeals and shouts are finally blessedly still.